Welcome to today's episode of Conversations with Karen and Kat. I'm Karen Scott Green.
And I'm Kat Hardrick.
And we are here today with a history maker.
That's right.
Linda.
Those L's and B's.
I know. Brenda Lopez Romero. She is the chairperson of the Gwinnett Democratic Party. And
Yes.
she also made history by being the first woman Latina to serve under the Gold Dome here in Georgia. So thank you, Brenda, for joining us for this episode. We are so excited to talk to you.
That's right. Thank you for being here on Women's Month, right?
That's right. It is also Women's Month, and we had just International Day of Women.
Yes.
So always really excited that worldwide we have at least one day that we can celebrate each other.
That's right. That's right.
Although we celebrate Women 365.
That's right. I saw somebody made a post. Right. I saw somebody made a post about reindeers and reindeers that the female keeps the antlers and the men, the male shed them. So who do you think doing all the heavy lifting and who gets the credit? It was a cute little joke, right? You think it's men, but it was really the females. I thought
same thing cute. Like with lions and the lioness. It's the lioness that do all the hunting.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about your background, Brenda. How did you come about with making this champion as being the chairwoman of the Gwinnett Democratic Party and your position under the Capitol Dome, under the Capitol?
Well, it was, I would say, just circumstances of life. I was originally born in Mexico, but I've been here in Georgia specifically since I was 5 years old. My father had already started migrating back and forth, initially to Texas and then eventually here to Georgia. And so in order to reunite, I'm the youngest of six. And so I came with my mom initially. And so my father was over here already to reunite. And so I, kind of grew up in this feed into worlds, right? My upbringing from working class parents to being able to be the first one to go to college, to be the first one to graduate from law school, and obviously to have the honor to eventually be elected, even though I'm now a former state rep and now still continuing to work adjacent to political things through the chairship with the Gwinnett Democrats. And so obviously this was not a path that someone had seen for me, nor that that was someone that I could call, a family member and say, hey, what do I do with my life?
Right.
It was just a day at a time, a year at a time. I will say partly might have been a personality thing because ever since I was a little girl, how we used to have, I don't know if they still have it now for the kids, but we used to have like academics on one side and behavior on the other on the report cards, right? So I usually had pretty good grades. But on the behavior side, I always had N's and U's to listening to instructions, to following directions, to working well with others. And the comment was always the same. Talkative too much, isn't quiet, doesn't raise her hand. And so, part of me feels like, maybe it's just an unfortunate thing of my personality that, that I was always kind of anxious to know why things were the way they were. And just because I said so wasn't a pretty good answer for me. And
is that child?
Yeah, I think most of us in this space probably are that child. And, that's the reality. If you see, we were talking about when we started off being Women's History Month. But I think a lot of the women in this space, for better or worse, we kind of have that, that same drive and that same push. And besides that, honestly, being the only one in my family, immediate family, that spoke English, right? By the time I actually learned English, by the time I was about 7 years old, I really became kind of the interpreter for all of my family's affairs, particularly my father's affairs, because my parents divorced when I was 7 as well. And my dad ended up winning custody of me. And so he raised me since then. And one of the things that actually came on as a Facebook memory just today earlier was a note that I had made last year where Bank of America had told me last year that they were calling me to thank me for 30 years of being a customer. Wow. Now, I am older now, but I'm not that much older. So it reminded me that I literally opened, quote unquote, my first bank account in my name when I was 9 years old, as my dad as the guardian. And we did that again because, we've had a mixed status immigration family as well. And so I was the one that was able to do these things and simply be able to fill out forms. So I think that all of those things kind of just led to always constantly at a young age having to inquire about how things work, how do how do you open a bank account? And I had to do that at a young age. And so I think it just naturally led to wanting to do work that was service oriented, and that was to help others, because the only reason I was able to get through high school, and the only reason I was able to, get through college, and the reason I was able to get through law school, and definitely the only reason that I was elected, was because I've had really great people that have supported me, have invested in me, and most often than not saw things in me that I didn't see in myself, and that I didn't know I could do, that I didn't know was even a possibility, right, or a thought. And I know that is how I've done the things I've done. It has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with my ability either, quite frankly. It really has been just a lot of great people in my life.
You.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's kind of what ultimately led me kind of down this path of not just the professional legal work as an attorney, but the advocacy side, because that's what I see it as, right? Advocacy. And I don't see it as politics. I don't see it as even campaign work, but rather, that is a means to the end, which is to advocate for better opportunities for people, or to provide opening of doors, and essentially, basically, what I feel other people have done for me.
That's beautiful.
So
that's really good.
I have to ask this question: was there one person who was more impactful than anyone else that you wanted to model your work after, your life after?
I love working with this girl. Like, she's in my head. I want to be like who was the person that inspired you most? Like, come on with it. I love this girl.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that, like, foundationally, my father, for sure, right? Because he raised me, I had a pretty in a way different upbringing as a young girl, to be raised by her father, and so he was the tough spirited, or life is hard, you just got to push on through, crying doesn't fix anything, sort of way of raising me. And so he was very fundamental, I think, of making me strong enough in character to deal with failure, to deal with mistakes, right? Because I've made plenty. But beyond that, I think that outside of home and outside of my father, I actually have a couple of people that had really important places in my life as I was growing up. And I will actually think of, like, my fourth grade teacher. My fourth grade teacher was one of, like, the first teachers that, like, would allow me to, like, work on projects by myself and wouldn't force me to do work projects that I didn't have to go outside to PE. She'd let me stay inside and read. And so, I remember her because of that, right? I remember her that, like, I was able to be me and not be, like, forced in what the requirements were. Yeah. And so there was something about that helped me kind of feel like it was okay that I didn't have, it wasn't always a negative, unsatisfactory for not being able to work in group projects. Instead, she saw it as an opportunity to let me have that responsibility. So I think of that about her in hindsight in that capacity. One of my other most important persons was in high school. My French teacher of all my teachers. She was the one that actually told me that I could be a lawyer and I could go to law school. Yeah. And not only that, but she actually was the one that helped me, like, fill out college applications, review my personal statements. She's the one that told me what FAFSA was, right? Like, I didn't even know that thing existed, much less what it was or how you fill it out. And so she's the one that helped me through that and gave me that information and was really proactive in doing that, and very encouraging, because that same year, I had her for 10th grade. And that same year in 10th grade, when you go talk to your high school counselors, when I talked to when I showed up to my counselors meeting that they're required, I guess, to churn students through, she told me that because I was bilingual, that I would make a good secretary or a receptionist.
What?
Everybody has one of those stories. Like there's always
right.
some sour, bitter teacher who undervalues a student who doesn't see your potential and just says
even if you don't see the potential, dude, I'm a kid. The sky's the limit.
Yeah.
So why would you say anything to already put in their head a limit, right?
Well, but what Karen was saying, it's unfortunately it's not something that, so that would have been like 23-ish years ago. It's not a problem of 20 something years ago. It's still a problem today, right? That we assume that kids from certain schools, from certain areas, can't dream to accomplish more than their surroundings and their backgrounds. And unfortunately, like you said, it's a story from everyone has. Again, anyone that has ever done anything that they wanted to do or that they've made accomplishments has some sort of someone telling them something similar. And I hear it still with young folks, right? College kids, high school kids. So, but that's a stark contrast, right? Between that 5-minute conversation I had with that counselor and the experience that I had with my French teacher. And one of the things that I noticed that it wasn't just that she was just kind and supportive to me, but she was just kind and supportive to all her students, including the quote unquote trouble kids, trouble students, right? That when they took her class, they actually did well, because she was just, she's just an excellent teacher. And so I think she was very, very important in my life. And actually, she was one of the first persons that gave me my first contribution when I ran for office. So that was like, like what, 15 years later.
Oh, that's lovely. That is lovely. Do you still keep in contact with her?
Yes, from time to time. We're on a social media space, so we see each other that way. And she's come to a thing or two from different, when I used to have campaign events and things like that. But yeah, something like kind of that full circle. And so she was really, I think, one of the most instrumental people at a young age, at K through 12. And I will say there's another individual that two more individuals once I got to college, and there was this gentleman. His name was William Hayes. He's since passed away. He passed away actually before I graduated law school, and so I was pretty upset. That I guess he didn't. He didn't see me graduate or know that I had graduated from law school, because he's another one that told me that I should go to law school. And he's a very caring person. The one that told me like how to sign up for college classes. Again, knowing nothing about how to do anything. He's the one that encouraged me to participate in student organizations, and through one organization that he had nominated me to be part of, that was kind of like an advisory board for the college. I ended up we did a conference, or we went to a conference in Chicago, and that was the first time that I had that was the first time I had flown on a plane. That was the first time I went out of the state, outside of coming, to this country, right? As any time after that. And so, so that was kind of the beginning of a lot of exposure that I had, and that I had the opportunities to do throughout college. And he was very instrumental in like introducing me to people that eventually gave me internships, and introducing me to a lot of the staff and bureaucracy in the college at Georgia State, that allowed me to kind of do student advocacy work there. So, and then just, again, the person that kind of like believed in me for no reason other than, he's just a great individual. And so he was really important. And also one of the persons that he introduced me has been someone that's been now my lifelong mentor. He is one of the reasons that I went to Syracuse University for law school, because that was his alma mater, and that has continued to advise me when I ran for office, because he was a former state senator as well. I guess now about 25, 30 years ago. So, I think these are all, then that's why I said that for me, like, I owe so much to so many people that, but particularly these folks have been very important in my life.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
And so it sounds like because you had that village around you to help suppress any negative voices, they kept amplifying things positive in your voice. And you mentioned that you came into this country, as an immigrant with your family. speak to the immigration advocacy work that you currently do now.
Right. Well, yeah, so I came in, but if this had been in current times, as we see it, because that's not something we thought about young people at the time. But even though I was still a minor, I was still undocumented. I was undocumented till I was about 17 years old. Okay. And happenstance was that even though my father had applied for me, he was a green card holder at the time. I technically didn't have a status. Okay. And so had our process not occurred and not been finalized by the time I was 17 and I was in 12th grade, I quite frankly would have ended up not probably going to college, because I would have been in that sort of immigration limbo, right? A circumstance that a lot of young people still deal with. Yes. And so, same thing. I didn't have a driver's license because I couldn't get a driver's license. And so, again, I didn't do anything to merit it. Nothing happened other than my processing time happened to coincide in enough time for me to be able to still start applying to college and be able to apply for things like the Hope Scholarship, which is one of the scholarships that I had, and other scholarships that I wouldn't have been eligible for had my processing had not taken place, or had it not been approved. And so for me, that's, again, sort of like life circumstances of some of the work that I've done in advocacy has been a lot around immigration, comprehensive immigration reform, because the problem is that, the reason that we have this 10 million-ish number of people that are undocumented, the vast majority of them are undocumented because there is no path to apply for, right? People aren't just hanging around being undocumented by choice, right? And so that's why when I just started practicing law, initially I did work as an immigration attorney. I was doing a lot of removal defense as well for about 10 years before I started working at the DA's office for these last 2 years. And so part of that is, pushing for the DREAM Act, and pushing for the DREAM Act for me kind of has been my other kind of focus and interest as an advocate, which is education opportunity. And because, again, I'm here today because education is an equalizer, right? And whatever amount of opportunity and success that I may have or may continue to have is going to be because I had the opportunity for higher education. And so that's really important to me, and that's why I like talking to a lot of K through 12 students. Like you mentioned, right? To like, hey, have someone tell you that you can do whatever you want. Not easy, but you can. And so, those things kind of coincided with me, between like kids literally being banned from even applying, regardless of their merit, to our colleges and universities.
Yep.
And the immigration context. So I worked a lot kind of in that junction, not just with immigration reform generally, but in the junction of like providing opportunities for particularly undocumented students. And, one of my first jobs that I had, I guess maybe official or real jobs, was as a program coordinator for a local scholarship at the time that was providing scholarships to undocumented students. And in addition to that, we did just college fairs, right? Like how to apply for financial aid. All of these things that my French teacher did for me is like trying to provide that information to other kids that might unfortunately not have that French teacher. And so I started doing some of that work in college, and that's kind of how I brought in the immigration advocacy, but no one has one problem, and so all of that brought in all the other issues, right? Issues of access to, whether it's housing, whether it's access to medical care, right? Whether it's civil rights violations, right? Whether it's just civil rights generally, and so obviously all the issues of prejudice and discrimination, and so it all kind of roots in the same kind of work of advocating for people that probably have the least amount of voice, if any, in all of our processes, right? In all our structures and agencies. And so that's why I say that happenstance I do this work. I think it's just because of the, my own experiences and my own needs. And how they were met by individuals providing me opportunities.
in speaking to this, it made me think about like no one should be treated unfairly for the color of your skin, the ability to speak the native language, your gender. No one should be discriminated, class, none of that, right? And I remember being at one of the stores, and one of the employees in the store, she didn't speak English, right? And I could tell she was not engaging with me as if not to, and so I pulled out my phone. I don't speak fluent Spanish, but you give me, the translation. I'm a killer on that. I know that, right? Yeah,
it does work.
And so we had a conversation through that, and she was fearful of losing her job because she couldn't speak fluent English.
Yeah.
So grace to God, I have a Cuban instructor. And so I called her up and they exchanged number, and she gave her free lessons so that she can learn English so she can keep her job.
Yeah.
What can we do as a community? Is there something that you are aware of, Brenda, to help with that language barrier? Because Gwinnett is the most diversified county in the country. So what are we doing? Because we have so many languages here. Do you know of any? And maybe you could speak to that.
Well, especially for Gwinnett County, right? Where we have, I think the 192 languages spoken worldwide, we have it here. And so, that's an even tougher situation. But one of the things I think we can do, especially now as our county has elected more and more Democratic leaning individuals across spectrum, right? What that means of where they are in that Democratic spectrum, ranges from a moderate centrist to, of course, more liberal. But one of the things I think that we still haven't done in terms of our government services is provide things like language line to be a standard, right? And I say language line so that you can deal with also all of the subset of languages that are spoken, maybe to not the same number or percentage as the four largest ones in Gwinnett County, which of course are Spanish, Vietnamese, Korean, and Chinese. But for every other language, you could use things like language lines. But I think that, it would be important for us to make sure that all information, not just required or federally mandated information, be provided in the four languages, plus again, having the opportunity to have things like language lines for people to call in for languages outside of that. Because of course, pragmatically, you're not going to print, literature in 192 languages. But you can say dial here for any other languages, which is what a lot of hospitals do now. And then that's out of federal mandate. And so, I think that that's a good opportunity to be able to integrate people that either aren't proficient in English, or quite frankly have more comfort. Again, in my family, right. In my family, we have the whole spectrum, right? We have, obviously, I'm fluent in both languages, reading, writing, and speaking, and and then we have some family members that may not speak any English at all, and everyone else is kind of somewhere in between. And so sometimes, it's just a matter of comfort, right? If you can hear your or read something in your home language or language that was spoken at home, you just simply feel more comfortable. And so I think that that's something that we can continue to advocate for our government elected individuals, especially those in the executive positions, to be able to do that. And but I think Kat, you mentioned something really important. You are going to be that person, someone, whether she gets to say it, on a podcast or not, but you'll be that person that she'll remember and say, hey, there was this person that took attention to that and made me feel comfortable and made it okay and helped. And I think that that's part of what we can do is ourselves be a little bit more understanding when people have accents, right? And we might not exactly understand, or we have to have things repeated. So I think that there's lots of personal growth that we all can have. But I think especially at the county level, there is more things that we can do in terms of language access that we haven't done yet.
I think about like when I used to do bankruptcies, if I came in for a hearing with a client who spoke a language other than English, they had the language line interpreters that they kept this conference phone out, and the trustee would call to the whatever the language was. They had somebody that they could get on the line. And I always wondered, like, why don't we do this in state court, superior court? Why don't we do this on the state side? They did it in the federal courts. So on state court, if you have a client who needs an interpreter, we oftentimes, the attorneys, have to let the court know so that the court can get an interpreter and have the interpreter there for the hearing.
So is that something we need to advocate for on a state level? Like, is that?
Oh, certainly.
Is that's something we need to do? Like, how do we, you know what I'm saying? How do we get that ball rolling?
Well, sure. At the state level would be great, but considering where our state legislature is and the fact that because we still have a Republican majority, and I tell folks, I don't say that out of partisanship. It's just a fact. The fact is that under Republican leadership, we are not going to have a lot of these, whether it's language access or many other things. They're just not going to pass. So that's why I kind of, for us, since we're the three of us are rooted here in Gwinnett County, and locally, that's where we can actually start these changes, right? Where we can eventually get to the state, or once the state kind of moves more towards that democratic leaning candidates or electeds, that we might be able to do something statewide. But if that is still something long term, it should not be an issue here in Gwinnett County, like you said, Karen. And the thing is, with courts, it's like not in all cases, right? Because if it's not a criminal case, and in Gwinnett County, outside of so there's a difference, right? If you have a probate issue and you have, like you said, a wills issue, you're going to come with your interpreter.
Your own attorney. Your own interpreter. That is true. Right. I forgot about that part. Wow. I was thinking along the criminal arena, but you are correct. If it's a civil matter, you are responsible for your own Spanish language interpreter, Korean language interpreter, whatever it is. You're responsible for having your own interpreter.
Doesn't that come into a price issue too then? Because they're not cheap, huh?
They charge an hourly rate just like attorneys do.
Right. So you're paying for an attorney and an interpreter.
Right. And just think about, this is once you're actually in a court, right, or case is processing. But even you want to come get marriage license. It's the same thing, right? For some things that are government services, you want to go pay your water bill. I've had plenty of people reach out and have concerns about, when we're having some issues with the water bills. It's like, I paid my water bill, but they keep saying haven't paid it, and it would be shut off. But they couldn't even communicate with the water department to try to figure out what the misinformation was. Sure. And so, across the board, that's what I'm saying. Language access, I'm thinking about for our county specifically, should be a standard. Just generally to provide government services, whether that's your water bill, right, or whether that's civil filings, and anything else in between.
Mm-hmm. So, Brenda, if you had to read the tea leaves, do you see any movement on the federal level for the DREAM Act or something comparable where we can get these dreamers into a real status so they can be on a path to apply for citizenship?
Well, not this term, right? Because we've lost the House, the U.S. House, and so, but I caveat that with saying that we've had all three not three branches, but all three, the House, the Congress, and the White House, we've had them all be under Democratic control at various times.
Yeah.
Under the Obama administration, under the Biden administration, under Clinton administration. And even then, no form of immigration reform has moved forward. Well, under Clinton it did, but not in the most positive way. But since then, and so quite frankly, that is part of my, concern that I have, that we talk about inclusion, we talk about being supportive of concerns for people with different immigration related issues. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when it has been a question about the opportunity is there to pass something because we do have democratic control, we still haven't done it. And so every single time, and that is one of the reasons that, quite frankly, a lot of immigrant and then the second, third generations have become a lot distrustful and or disengaged from democratic support, because it might not affect me, right? Because the idea is I might be a U.S. citizen, but I have friends and family that may not be, and so it still matters to me because it's not just about an issue for me personally. And so there's a growing level of distrust at worst, and at best, like I said, disengagement from the democratic institution as a party affiliation, because it's like, well, you say these things, but when you've had the opportunity, when you've had the power, and when you have been in control, you didn't do it. And so, how often are you going to keep being utilized? When us as a party institution lose that credibility. And so that is my concern, that right now the justification is always the justification that we no longer have the House. It's not something that would pass, and that may be legitimately true, but once we regain democratic control, because it's always a pendulum, goes back and forth, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get anywhere. But I think that eventually something will pass, just because it's a cyclical, and by cyclical I mean like generation or two has to pass before things get done at the federal level. But I will tell you something that I keep highlighting to particularly those with a democratic affiliation or institutional affiliation, is that the Republicans are very strategic, and even in the state house, with all the anti-immigrant legislation that they've passed year after year, they're the ones, because they are in control, that are pushing things like education equity for undocumented students to be able to pay in-state tuition here in Georgia. They're starting to file these bills. They haven't gotten anywhere. They've only gotten a hearing once before. It hasn't been voted on. But the fact that they're even showing the willingness, right?
And they're persistent.
Right. And whether or not it's even genuine, I wouldn't even give them the benefit of it being a genuine attempt at it. But the fact that they are, for everyday people, it's like, okay, well, here's these folks that we keep saying are the reason why these things don't pass, but here they are at least pushing these issues forward. And so it really concerns me, and this is just about this topic, but it concerns me about a lot of other topics that we claim to talk about our inclusion or our support, but when it comes down to it, sometimes we fall short of our principles or our ideals. And so I think that's something we have to be cognizant of, especially with people, again, in our space that are involved in advocacy work and law and politics.
So with that being said, what is your future plan for the party right now with all of those challenges that you just mentioned? I mean, you do have a lot of things to accomplish, but if you have people who are becoming disconnected and kind of losing faith and just being told over and over again, we're going to achieve this, but when you have the ball in the hand, you keep fumbling. And I don't even think it's a fumble. You just literally just don't even try. So what do we need to do? How do you foresee like turning that around for the party?
Right. Well, and for at least Gwinnett, and again, the focus is on doing that work in Gwinnett, is what it's also not. It's not like we say rocket science, right? You actually have to engage with people in a legitimate way. You have to actually build relationships with individuals, that you show up.
And be consistent.
Consistently, right? Not every election cycle, right? Not the last 3 months before the election date, and so locally, I think that's one of the things that we're doing, particularly as on the Gwinnett Democratic committee side, is at least these last 2 years and these next 2 years from the two terms that I'll be serving. we've done ad buys in the four major languages, and that, you know, and the ad buys weren't necessarily solely about candidate support, right? It was voter education information. When do you vote? How do you vote? Where do you vote? You know, here's the voter protection hotline. So kind of information in a way so that we can be provide some utility other than just like vote for this X, Y, or Z person. Yeah. And so that's I think that there's no other way around it. I think that sometimes we might want like the magic bullet that if I'm just gonna, you know, snap my fingers and it's going to happen. And unfortunately, it's a long-term engagement. And I think, Kat, you and I don't remember, Karen, if you were there yesterday, that we were at the a town hall that the police department put together.
I walked right past you and spoke.
And then we said hello.
I have my signature blue glasses, so that may have been why you didn't recognize it.
That's right. Listen. Well, I'll tell you that in a moment so we don't get sidetracked. But I love your glasses. And Park Cannon was my seatmate for 4 years, and she always had the most awesome glasses. And I wish I could wear stuff like that, but then I don't know. But we'll see. But you know, one of the reasons y'all, because I got there a little bit late, that y'all were there for 5 hours plus, was because this was the first time that the PD had done something like this. I was at Lilburn Middle School, and they had Dr. Watts, the superintendent, come talk to parents there also, and there was about 100 plus parents there, and you know, lots of questions that we didn't get to because, well, we didn't stay for 5 hours, but because people don't speak to us frequently. Right. And consistently, like we said. And sometimes, you know, people just want to know that you heard them tell you what their concerns are. And I think that goes even further than sometimes even actually being able to address the problem. But, you know, if you say, hey, for limited resources, for X, Y, or Z reasons, this is where we're at, people can understand that. But people can't understand an unwillingness to engage with them. And so, you know, I think that was symptomatic.
Yeah. Unfortunately, one theme that we heard several times was that several family members had come to that forum last night because they hadn't heard anything about their loved one's case. Right. You know, someone had been murdered, someone is missing, and they were calling the police department and they're not getting return phone calls. Right. You know, so we heard that theme several times, and so folks showed up because they wanted to be heard. And even if they couldn't address their particular case, they wanted to speak.
And that's most resolution. I used to work in mediation for the state of Michigan, and most people just want to be heard. If you give them an opportunity, don't already have an answer to my statement. You like what is I forgot what it's active listening. I need you to be actively listening to what I'm saying and not actively thinking about
your response.
Right.
And so then to add that to you not calling me back, it's like the people were very frustrated, rightfully so, right? We pay taxes. Something has happened to our loved one. We need to get some responses. And moreover, if we can continue to have that type of dialogue with solutions, that's another thing. Citizens are like fatigued. There's only so many forums we can go to, and then there's nothing that comes out of it.
Yes.
So that's why we're doing this podcast, because we want to create a space where people can find solutions. So with that,
because I don't want to be meeting just for meeting's sake.
Correct. I want to have solutions. So do you have to some of that, like one of the young person, I think she was 18. She said she wanted to be the voice of the young people, the young lady that got up and spoke. And she was Spanish speaking, and she just, it was her school was having violence, and she just wanted to be a voice so that they can be heard, so someone can come and do something to their school, for their schools. And we need to be that village to listen to these young people. Like, it was a ton of kids there. It was a ton of young adults there. They need to be heard, and now we need to react. Now, what are we going to do as Kat, as Karen, as Brenda, as everyone that was in that room? How can we rally around our children? And what do you suggest? What are one of the things that you...
Well, one of the things that especially is of concern right now in the state legislature and for the next 4 years under our current governor is this regression back to like the tough on crime stance, right? Yeah. We've seen this song and dance before, and we know where the song and dance leads to, and it is not to make our community safer. It is not to decrease crime, but it will continue to increase our already high numbers of incarceration, and it is not going to help our kids get in less trouble. It is not going to help our kids, not deal with substance abuse. And so tough of crime just isn't, mandatory minimums, aren't going to dissuade anyone. No one goes around committing a crime wondering if this one, carries a mandatory minimum or not.
Right. In the same way that the death penalty has never deterred anyone from committing their murder. Never.
Right. And again, and I think that we need to be able to talk, especially at the county level, going back to the county level, that this is an and situation. We do need accountability. We do need, from time to time in certain instances, including to have incarceration. And we also need to see what other alternatives we can have. What are some of the, we go back to like the root issues that cause people to usually lack of under-resourced, right? That end up persuading people to, especially young people, into this concern of being part of being involved in crimes or being involved in gangs. And it's also about the conversation that I think in Gwinnett, especially, we have to hold the line precisely because of how diverse our county is, about this conversation that, that the earth is on fire and that crime is just skyrocketing, because the statistics and the numbers just don't add up to that. And I know that when you're the victim of a crime, and I've been a victim of a crime too, but we have to try to have that conversation that we can't just root it in our own personal experience, but rather like, what does this mean as a societal impact, right? And when you start talking about like, this increase in drug use, which is very different from what's happening with deaths, right? From overdosage, and that's usually because they're being laced with fentanyl, particularly. So it's an conversation where how do we make sure that the one or a couple of times that we make bad decisions and bad choices, that does not mark the rest of our lives, and how do we give those opportunities to try to move away from that? And I think that you can have that conversation and also say that, but that doesn't mean that from time to time we don't understand that someone may commit something egregious enough that we do need to separate them from society, right? These are not mutually exclusive conversations, and I think in Gwinnett we need to hold that line, because we're not doing it at the state level. At the state level, under Nathan Deal, he had been the one that was pushing kind of for more a switch away from just punishment as criminal justice, and unfortunately we're backtracking and retrogressing, like I said, and that conversation is not going to stop at the state level. They're going to continue to insist that, again, the world is falling apart, and that people are committing all of these crimes, and that we're just so unsafe. Here's the other reality, especially for Gwinnett County or for our state generally. When we say that crime hasn't increased, it hasn't increased per capita, right? When people were like, well, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was in Gwinnett County, we had no crime. Listen, even though that's one, not true, but two, even 20 years ago, we had less than half the population that we have, right? And so the reality is that we are humankind. We're all humankind. And unfortunately, the more of us together in one place, the more things happen.
Yeah, that's
right? True. And so what people see as now they see more crime isn't that they see more crime, is that there's more of us together. And we're being people, right? And again, and sometimes we do bad things, and sometimes we make bad mistakes. And these are different things. And so it's important, I think, for us here in Gwinnett, because we will continue to see this conversation about drug use increase, crime increase, and gang membership increase. And I will tell you, like, working at the DA's office, I had seen kind of the questionnaire that they give to inmates kind of to determine their gang affiliation, right? And in all honesty, if you had asked me that, when I was like 15 years old, I would have checked off stuff, right? Because it's in our surroundings. It's not something we choose to engage in, right? Do we know people in gangs? Do we know people? Sure, if you're in that, so if that's the surroundings that you're in, right? And so that that's just something really important that I want us, particularly here in Gwinnett County, to continue to, one, personally do, but then also advocate with our electeds and our law enforcement, not to encourage this conversation, because you can have a conversation about dealing with substance abuse, but that is different from saying, and this is a conversation we've seen differently from opioid overuse, right? For opioid overuse, the conversation is about addiction and substance abuse and it being an illness and needing treatment.
Versus when it's crack, right?
Whether it's crack or weed or cocaine or anything else that apparently isn't prescribed medication, it's an issue about. It's an issue. It's not an issue of addiction. It's not an issue of needing treatment. It's an issue of being a criminal and engaging in criminal behavior.
Yes.
And those drugs lead to the encouragement of criminal behavior, right? So. We know that this conversation, again, nothing is being reinvented that we haven't seen before. What I want us to be aware of is that we're going back to that.
Yeah.
And
I've said this before. I think I may have had this conversation with Kat before. And I said that, crime is a pendulum and our reaction to crime is a pendulum. So back when Clinton was in office, they had this super predator, that narrative, right? So then they make very harsh laws to incarcerate folks for long periods of time. That's when we got the 3 strikes you're out, between Reagan and Clinton, 3 strikes you're out came about. So we get tough on the crime, and then 10, 20 years down the road, you realize, we have all of these folks who are incarcerated for long periods of time. And now our federal prisons and state prisons are overcrowded for people who are in jail for really what were like drug issues. So let's now start giving them amnesty. Let's start giving them so that pendulum, and here we are 30, 40 years later, saying the same thing and wanting to get tough on the use of drugs, and we're going to go. It's going to swing right back the other way.
And that's where we are starting, and it's all reactionary, and so I think that's why I brought that up, because I think it's on us to push away from that conversation.
I agree with you.
Absolutely.
I agree with you.
It's always good talking to you, lady.
Listen, what we did not ask is, you are a very busy woman. You are a full-time attorney in the DA's office. You are chair of the Gwinnett Democratic Party. And you also are an advocate for folks in your community. What do you do to take care of Brenda Lopez Romero?
Well, I like food. So I like going out and eating a lot. And then, I like dancing. So I go out dancing as well. Yeah. So, a lot of that, honestly, over the years now, a lot of my professional social has mixed together, right? Because you're right. We are so involved in a professional space that ends up being our personal socializing space as well. And, that's got its pros and cons, but outside of that, I think that, I just, I do like trying new places, to go eat. I love traveling. And I try to do that as much as I can. Especially these last 2 years, I got a bit of it in that I wasn't able to just because of time, when I was still elected or I was still campaigning. And so, that's kind of what I do on my downtime.
Okay.
That's real good. We like to give people little nuggets so they can try it themselves, because we believe in mental wellness.
Yes.
So we always want to ask folks, what are you doing to take care of yourself? So
taking some time to woosah.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much for making history.
Yeah.
You know,
it was a pleasure talking to you, Brenda. It really is. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Conversations with Karen and Kat.
Well, we are impacting the world one conversation at a time.